Hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about the carbon cycle. We're going to talk about how carbon cycles through with a focus on the different spheres, the lithosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere and biosphere. We're going to talk about why carbon's special, and then we're going to look at some of the processes that move the carbon around into its different forms, including photosynthesis, feeding, cellular respiration, decomposition, fossilisation, combustion, and being dissolved in the oceans. Okay, so firstly, what's the point? Like, why is carbon important? Now, it's an element like any other elements, but the important thing about carbon is it forms the basis of all living molecules, or we call these organic molecules. And it does this because of its unique structure. It's got 4 electrons in the outer shell, so it means that it can bond in a whole heap of different ways with different elements, creating many different molecules. Now, most of these organic molecules are made of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen, but you've also got other things in there like phosphorus, nitrogen and sulfur in these organic or living molecules. There's a consistent amount of carbon in the world. So that amount of carbon has been in those 4 spheres pretty much since the creation of the Earth. So to keep on using that, and for us to keep growing and trees to keep growing and all these sorts of things to happen, that carbon needs to cycle through the different spheres. And as I said, that's going to be what we concentrate on here, how it changes in the different spheres. So firstly, we have photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis is a process that occurs in plants. It also occurs in algae. And what happens is carbon dioxide and water in the presence of chlorophyll and sunlight produce oxygen and sugar. Now, the important thing there is that carbon dioxide, so the carbon that's in the atmosphere as a gas, gets turned into carbon in the biosphere, and it starts off as a sugar, but then gets used as food or energy by the plant to make a whole heap of different things. So we're going from the atmosphere to the biosphere. The next one is feeding. Now, so whenever an animal eats a plant or another animal, it's eating carbon. It's eating the organic molecules that are in that other organism and assimilating at least some of them into its body. And this allows the carbon to be moved through the trophic levels, or the feeding levels, from the producer, being the plants, up through the consumers. So the example here is there's strawberries. They've come from a strawberry plant, harnessing that from the sun, turning that carbon dioxide into sugar. The turtle then eats that sugar and turns it into sugar or proteins inside its body, and then I can't remember what bird this was. It might have been a stork, but I can't remember. Then eats the turtle, moving that up the trophic level. So this isn't really changing forms, or changing spheres, but it is moving from one organism to another. Now, all of those organisms undergo cellular respiration, and this isn't to be confused with respiration that humans do and they breathe in and out. This is something that happens on a cellular level. So inside the cell, there's an organelle called the mitochondria, and the mitochondria, or in mitochondria, this equation or metabolic reaction occurs called cellular respiration. And in its basic form, we have glucose, which is broken down in the presence of oxygen into carbon dioxide and water. So you're seeing that glucose, which went from the atmosphere to the biosphere in the plants, is now going from the biosphere back into the atmosphere as that carbon dioxide. The stuff that doesn't get breathed out as carbon dioxide is locked into the body of that organism, and as it grows, it has more carbon in it, or more organic compounds in it which have a carbon base. When that organism dies, things move in to break down the body. Now, so we have detritivores and decomposers. These are organisms like fungi, bacteria, some sort of small scavengers, and they eat that dead carcass, breaking it down into inorganic molecules. Now, most of that is going to be lost through carbon dioxide, through the respiration of that organism that actually breaks it down, or whether it's fermentation or stuff like that. But as a product of the metabolism of that organism, most of it will be released as carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. However, some of it won't get released back into the atmosphere, and maybe because it got buried really quickly, or it was covered in ice or something like that, or trapped in a bog. These organisms don't get broken down and turned into carbon dioxide. Instead, they get stuck down in the lithosphere in the earth, and over time fossilization occurs, turning these organic deposits into fossil fuels like coal and oil. So we have things like ancient bogs, ancient algae slime in swamps, and then that turns into oil. Ancient trees become coal, and that is then stuck down in the lithosphere. Now, there is some movement from the lithosphere back into the atmosphere, but it occurs quite slowly in comparison to things. So for all intents and purposes, that carbon is trapped inside the lithosphere. Unless we dig it out of the ground and burn it. So if we burn these fossil fuels, that's the carbon that's been trapped in the ground for millions of years that we're burning, returning back to the atmosphere. Also, in a shorter term sort of look at it, if we take trees or a dead tree, wood, and burn it in our fireplace, that also puts carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So whether it's carbon dioxide from wood that was like carbon dioxide in before the tree 10 years ago maybe, to fossil fuels, which was carbon dioxide in the atmosphere millions of years ago, we're moving it from either the biosphere or the lithosphere back into the atmosphere. Now, the main place that carbon dioxide is found, other than the atmosphere, which I talked about, is actually dissolved in the oceans. So we have a large two-thirds of Australia is covered in two-thirds of the world is covered in water, and carbon dioxide is dissolved into that water in the oceans. That carbon dioxide is used by organisms that live in the water. So, for example, aquatic plants, algae, stuff like that. That uses that carbon dioxide, undergoes photosynthesis, and turns that into organic molecules. Another thing that occurs is shells, which are made of calcium carbonate. So the carbonate's got the carbon in there. So these shells made by mollusks in the ocean, they also have carbon in them. So that's another place that's trapped in the ocean. Now, the problem here is if that dissolved carbon dioxide comes out of the ocean, so from the hydrosphere back into the atmosphere, again, we're getting more and more carbon in the form of carbon dioxide building up in the atmosphere. In this video, we've talked about carbon being the basis of organic molecules or living things. I've talked about photosynthesis, taking that carbon from the atmosphere into the biosphere, feeding relationships about carbon moving around in the biosphere, cellular respiration, going from the biosphere to the atmosphere, decomposition, going from the biosphere to the atmosphere, fossilisation from the biosphere to the lithosphere, combustion from the biosphere to the atmosphere, or the biosphere to the lithosphere to the atmosphere, depending on how that worked, and that big store of carbon dioxide that is dissolved into the hydrosphere, and a little bit of how it's moved around there. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace out.